and rose up, and went unto the place which God had told him.
Then on the third day Abraham lifted his eyes, and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it upon Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand, and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. And they came to the place which God had told him of. And Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. Fearest God. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called that place blah 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 blah, and it's that day it's called this, and blah 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 blah. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven a second time, and he said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven and the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up, and they went together to this place and that place, and blah blah blah, and then he had this, and so began so and so.
Blah 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 blah.
Blah 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 blah.
Blah 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 blah.
Blah blah blah.
Blah, 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 blah.
Blah blah blah.
No, blah, blah, blah!
Oh. As it says in Surah 2:124, and remember when the Lord tried Abraham, in other words, tested or tempted Abraham, with his commands, and he fulfilled them. In other words, he was going to kill Isaac. He said, Lo, I have appointed thee a leader for mankind. Surah 3:67, Abraham was not a Jew, nor yet a Christian, but he was an upright man who surrendered his salam to Allah, and he was not of the idolaters. Now, what I'm about to say should go without saying, but it is amazing how brainwashed some people can be so that they don't actually get this. Killing is wrong. Attempted murder is also wrong. Telling somebody to kill somebody is wrong. Even if you plan to stop them at the last second, it's not good. So killing is wrong even if God tells you to do it. It's still wrong. Abraham should have refused to kill Isaac. He should have said no and just faced the wrath of God. Now, a predictable portion of believers will reply with certain apologetic remarks that you hear over and over again. And none of these bear out anything. One thing you hear often is, but Abraham didn't actually kill Isaac. Okay, again, attempted murder. It's wrong. Another thing is that people argue, well, God never intended to let Abraham kill Isaac. Yeah, we know that. So what? Number one, God told him to do it. Number two, God was pleased when he went to do it. And number three, he went to do it. And he was rewarded for his submission. God rewards Abraham for his submission.
Yes, I believe that Islam is submission.
The point is that God demands Abraham to do something very wrong to prove his submission. It is wrong for God to ask this. It is wrong for a person to comply. The mental block surrounding this particular story is so strong that it is perhaps futile to take it straight on. So I'm going to try approaching this story from two different angles. Let's approach the story from the first angle. Consider cases like this. You've heard this in the news. A woman hears the voice of God, tells her to kill her children. She drowns them in a bathtub, or she puts them in a car and drives the car into the lake. Whatever the situation might be. It's either attempted murder or murder. She's obeying God, at least in her mind. Is this good? Consider a man who hears the voice of God, tells him to kill his son. He binds his son, pulls out his handgun, puts the handgun to his son's head. He's just about to pull the trigger. Suddenly somebody saves that kid's life. It's a neighbor, it's the dog, it's an angel from God, whatever. Still attempted murder. Is this good? Is it good for this man to obey the voice of God? Okay, now we're going to approach the story from the other end. Imagine you're me at 8 years old, and you're reading the Bible. You think it's really cool, and you get to the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac. You read that God tells Abraham that he's got to take his son up to the mountain where he's going to kill him. And you think to yourself, I know what's going to go on here. This is a story because it says in the beginning God did tempt Abraham, tempt meaning a test. And I thought, I know what's going to happen here. Abraham's going to refuse to kill his son. He's going to tell God that killing is bad, because we all know that, you should know this by the age of 8 or whatever. And that God is going to say, if you don't kill your son, I'll do something to you because I'm God, you better obey me, and blah, blah, blah. And Abraham's going to say, sorry, God, I'm afraid of you. I know you're big and scary and blah, 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 but come on, it's my son. I'm not going to kill my son, right? And then at that point, God's going to say, hey, Abraham, it was just the test. I was going to see if you were going to go through with it, and you were brave, and you did the right thing. And so now I'm going to reward you for refusing to obey me, for refusing to submit. And I'm going to reward you for standing up to me, because that's what I want. And from you, I will make many nations grow, and blah, 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 because you're the kind of guy I want. So then I read on. Or, you're me, so you're reading on to the story, and you get to the point where Abraham's starting to tie up his son. And you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Come on, Abraham, you gotta, step up to the plate and tell God to fuck off. And then Abraham raises the blade, and he's just about to do it. Now, I was horrified. I'm like, oh man, I guess God's gonna punish Abraham for attempted murder. Which is kind of weird and kind of manipulative of God, but still. But then what you find out is that God's happy that Abraham was willing to commit murder. and that God rewards him for being submissive and for doing the obedient thing instead of doing the right thing. Now, I don't know about you the first time you heard about the story. I was absolutely horrified, okay? And this is probably the main reason why I didn't become an atheist. I just became anti-theist. I thought, that's sick. If that's the way that God's going to be, I have to be against him for the sake of goodness. Abraham's choice is a selfish one. There is no excusing Abraham. Likewise, there is no excusing God. What God does is wrong. To place somebody in such a position, as God does with Abraham, is monstrous. It's easy to imagine a really horrific horror movie created on the same scenario, but you replace God with some sort of villain. Maybe put a gun in his hand and he forces some dad to make a choice to either kill his son or be killed. Would make a pretty good horror film, right? Well, that villain, that's your God.